Dad? Dad, vacation's over. You have a class to teach.
Hi, yeah. Let me get my roll up my beach mat and oh, darn, spilled my Mai Tai. All right, if I am going to leave one paradise, I'm going to another. I'm going to Hunter College, paradise on the East River.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. How good to be with you this evening. It's always great when folks who are interested in helping kids and serving kids with mental health and behavioral challenges, when we get together, there's always a great atmosphere surrounding it. So yes, I guess vacation's over, and welcome to our first meeting, Sped's 751, Methods and Materials for Kids Who are Experiencing Emotional and Behavioral Troubles. We welcome all of you. Kids. We have a two-part video on social skills, teaching of social skills. That, along with our PowerPoint session tonight, will assist you in a major assignment, the development of a 5-lesson unit to teach a social skill to a youngster. More on that in the syllabus on our Blackboard site. And anytime you want to communicate with me, not just office hours, but if we can find a common convenient time, then we'll both be at the office hours Zoom link, or we can phone each other, and we'll resolve whatever that issue might be. Have our Zoom gathering, an overview of social emotional learning, a major emphasis in the last couple of years that has taken on increased importance with the pandemic, the anxiety that kids and teachers are feeling as we return to the school year in various forms. And afterwards, I'll stay as long as people want to chat about anything related to the course. Kick back, relax, take a deep breath. There is no test on this material. And in fact, if you want to go back to this PowerPoint presentation, it's going to be on that link that will appear on our Blackboard site a little bit later. So you will be able to click on this PowerPoint that I'm using now, and in the notes section of each of the slides, you'll find my script, so to speak, the notes that I look at before I give this session. So along with the slides, you'll see the notes to myself and the script. And yes, this will help to prepare us for that major assignment, that social skills unit that will come due at some point during the semester. Oh, goodness. I thought I'd bring this up because this semester affects how we learn and how this course moves along. I suspect that the vast majority, I hope all of you, recognize this image as, does that name come back to mind? Abraham Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And you'll remember from your Ed Foundations class that we need to be secure in a lower level before we can take on the task of achieving higher needs. And while most of us were at the pinnacle, you're studying to become a special ed teacher, reaching your full potential, although your full potential will always be moving a little bit ahead of you, and you'll strive for new self-actualization. And we were operating there. We had good esteem. We were thinking, hey, I'm doing all right in this program, and I'm looking forward to it. And all in all, I feel very competent in life. We have our connection with important people, that essential first stage of emotional needs, the very human needs. But this pandemic has made many of us drop down to the initial foundational levels that for some, there may be employment issues, and that affects the ability to pay rent. There may be food insecurity. Our rest may be restless. We may not be resting as well. The physiological needs. Many of us are concerned about our safety needs. There's this thing out there that we have to protect ourselves from. Many of us can take comfort in the people who are important in our lives. Others of us have been separated. For example, I'm not able to see my brother who lives in another side of the state. We just don't think it's safe. I'm concerned about my kid when she goes to soccer practice. And are the other kids from families that are taking precautions? It's a difficult time, and it makes it a little bit difficult to move to those upper levels. And with regards to this course, just applying ourselves fully and taking from it. But we're going to adjust. We are going to persevere, and we are going to nail this course. And as we were mentioning here, as I was mentioning, that tonight when we talk about social emotional learning, we're going to talk about um, the crucial terms with which to be aware and the theoretical foundations, the concepts involved. There are so many different ways of categorizing the parts of social emotional learning. We'll look at the ones that are most prominent. We'll try to figure out, well, why is it that some kids, and if they weren't assisted when they were younger, adults, aren't proficient at social skills? But then there's that word in parentheses that Carol Dweck wants us to keep saying to kids when they say, I can't do this. We say, well, not yet. The word yet gives hope. But the two of us teaming up, we are going to learn this just like we learned, and you mentioned something the kid is now proficient at. And because the social skills kits or the social emotional learning curriculum are so different, and many of you will be told, hey, you've got to teach that kid some social skills, a value system, you've got to engage in some character education. Oh, and by the way, we don't have any money. We spend it all on personal protective equipment. And so it'll take me back to the future with when I was teaching in a self-contained classroom with kids with conduct disorders and oppositional defiant disorder and some kids on the spectrum. And they're saying, teach these kids to behave, teach these kids to show the correct behavior. And but sorry, we haven't got anything to help you out. So I learned, if I haven't got $1,000 to spend on a program, you can create your own, especially now with the internet and everything that's available to us. And we will see in the module on teaching social skills the various checklists and sociograms and ways of observing youngsters to determine, well, what are their needs and how do I go about meeting those social, emotional, social interaction needs. And when you're planning your unit, when you have planned your unit and all the directions on our Blackboard site, you'll be adapting them for the 3 levels of PBIS. And PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. Welcome to the folks who have just joined us. We're just talking right now, dipping our toes into the waters of social emotional learning. And an assignment related to that, in which we'll be developing a 5-lesson unit on teaching social skills to a youngster. There we go, the PBIS Pyramid. You're probably familiar with that from Sped 700 and perhaps Sped 750. Why they call it a pyramid, I don't know, because it always seems to be two-dimensional. You don't see it very often as a pyramid. It's one of those perplexing things, I guess, like why do we drive on parkways and park on driveways? And what do you do if an endangered animal is eating another endangered animal, you know? But it's one of those perplexing things. And we recognize the three strata, the three levels. Tier one being things that we do for all kids in a general education classroom to help them behave better. Tier two, we've got some youngsters who may need to be in small groups to study more appropriate behavior, become practiced in it. And then at tier three, we have our most severely involved kids who may need individual interventions. And right now, if you would, into the chat room, please enter some strategies and some interventions that you've heard of and identify which strata, which tier that applies to. So it might be the youngster carries a rating card, and in each class, the teacher circles 1 to 3 on various behaviors the youngster's working on. You say, oh, that's a tier 3 strategy, an individual strategy. Now, I realize not everybody is going to participate in this chat, but think of some of the behaviors, some of the behavioral interventions or the things we do. Identify one or a couple and identify which tier it belongs in. Oops. There we go. And as I go to the chat room, welcome to the 2 or 3 people who just joined us. We're talking about our topic tonight, social emotional learning. And right now we're discussing some of the strategies that are used on the different tiers of the PBIS pyramid. So, gosh, it moves so quickly. Yeah, Derek is mentioning that we have classroom incentives, ways to get, it might be class dojo, it might be giving points, it might be just giving appropriate praise. But a restorative conversation. Of course, my colleague in the BD program, Elizabeth Klein, is very studied in restorative practices, and you will be watching a video of her demonstrating some of the restorative practices and meetings as one of our modules. Gosh, so much coming in. Oh, individualized behavior plans, the BIP, that addition onto a youngster's IEP if they have behavioral concerns. Well, we've got a special section, the Behavior Intervention Plan, the BIP, that outlines what we're going to do to help this youngster display more appropriate behavior. Yes, rules and routines I'm seeing on here for Tier 1, that within our general education classroom, everybody learns the rules and the routines. Daily check-ins and check-outs, that could be tier 2 or 3, that the youngster meets with a mentor upon coming to school. It could be a counselor, it could be a teacher, it could be a volunteer, and talks about, well, how's it going so far today? We take the youngster's emotional temperature and what are they bringing into school with them today? We help them get in the appropriate mindset for success. We talk about what they're going to do. We might even practice it. And we'll check out with that youngster at the end too. Yep, behavioral tracking for our tier 3 kids, because data collection is essential. Now we'll whether it's essential or not is an argument, but it is mandated that we have numerical information regarding the prevalence of a behavior. Yes, progress reports and yeah, checklists. Gosh, there's so much. Sage advice, point systems, token economies. Uh, those could be used with an entire classroom if it's a small classroom, say a self-contained classroom of 11 kids, but those 11 kids are probably all on tier 3, so it tends to be a tier 2, tier 3 system. All right, reading rescue. So we're getting into the academic side, which we know as RTI, response to intervention, the academic version of the behavioral side. All right, super duper. Thank you much, folks, for contributing. If only we were together personally. This is such a fun activity. I would put up this slide and I'd say, look at things are different now. There's a new group in power. And if you want to be successful in their society, in their institutions, you're going to have to be proficient in their ways. So whenever you refer to yourself, instead of doing what I typically do, which is point to my chest, you would have to point to your chin every time you say, well, here's something I do and what I like to do. And so that would be required throughout the classroom session. My wife, who comes from a different part of the world initially, the correct way to do it in her former country was whenever you were referring to yourself, you point to your face, you point to your nose. And if you had a question, you were supposed to raise your hand with the back of your hand showing. If you were contributing to our class, you would tap your head. This is your second contribution. You would tap your head twice. And it's hilarious to watch how quickly some people pick it up and how others just can't seem to wrap their brains around it. But that's what happens with our kids. Some kids pick it up quickly. Other kids, it's quite a challenge and it takes longer. The most prevalent, the most often seen training, professional training in social emotional learning to the schools is from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, what's known as CASEL. My kids' school district uses the CASEL system. And it's, well, I guess we gave this away, but it's a process through which kids and adults acquire and apply knowledge regarding, gee, what's the best thing to do in this situation? To have a motivated attitude to attempt to fit in positively to a social situation and have the skills to do so, the practice skills that are necessary to, well, understand and manage their emotions. First of all, a lot of our kids don't have names for the feelings that they have. And if you haven't got the vocabulary, it's hard to communicate to others how you're feeling at that moment. Teachers might have charts that kids point to as they come in, or if they're looking tense, we take them over to a chart that has a lot of different faces and labels, and it helps the youngsters to better understand what's going on inside themselves so that they can deal with it. We can give them strategies for that. And yes, we want them to set positive goals, to say, I want to achieve this. Well, what do you want to achieve and how do we do that? Let's task analyze the behavior that will help you to be more positively perceived by others, to be more socially acceptable to others, to be able to put yourself in the position of another and understand how they might be feeling at that particular moment. And certainly, while we try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, it's still our own feet that we feel. But can we have concern for another individual and try to understand what they're going through at that moment? Empathy. Teaching them the skills to become friendly with others, to develop friendships, to develop collegial relationships, mentor-mentee relationships, and be able to keep those going on a positive path. And how to make responsible decisions, accepting responsibility. Yeah, I goofed. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. Won't happen again. Okay, well, great. Let's practice it to make sure that the new way pops up next time you run across this circumstance. So a thoughtful, responsibility accepting mindset. Wow, some of you are familiar with that Indo-Asian story, ancient story. Well, it's an ancient story, but got published in the 1800s about the 7 blind men and the elephant, that they come upon this elephant, and the one who feels the ears says the elephant is like a fan. And the one feeling the tusk says, no, the elephant is like a spear. And as you go around there, the one feeling the leg says, no, the elephant's like a pillar or a tree, where the one touching the side, it's a wall, and the one touching the tail, it's a rope. Social emotional learning is still trying to find itself and to have a similar view of things. They may agree or disagree on what's involved in social emotional learning, what should be in the curriculum. For example, okay, group participation skills, that certainly seems important for a classroom where we have group cohabitation, whether it's the virtual classroom or the in-person classroom, that you need to know social etiquette, or if you're on the internet, etiquette, and what exactly is involved in that. Should social interaction conformities be taught? Gee, we've been teaching kids how to shake hands when they meet someone. Now we've got to teach them a whole new behavior pattern, which can be difficult for kids who don't pick up on new ways quite as quickly. Oh gosh, classroom success skills. Should grit and growth mindset be in social emotional learning? Grit, that persistentness, easy for me to say, that stick-to-itness, that never give up mentality. Should that be part of social emotional learning? Well, Angela Duckworth, who's the big name in that field, would say yes, and others are saying, no, grit is some psychological principle that's been around for a long time, but it's unrelated to actually developing social skills. And agency, that's a word I'm still trying to figure out. And if anybody has a good explanation of it, please feel free to unmute yourself. As I look at the definition, acts independently outside of the structure of class, race, and culture. People use that word agency a lot, and I'm just not picking up on it. Anybody got a good explanation? Aha, it's a social student. And Virgil, we'll get to yours in just a little bit. All right. I guess I'll just have to keep going to the dictionary and trying to figure out exactly what it is. But in the chat box, here is your chance to participate. It's not going to happen immediately. We're going to give you a 1-minute activity. And at the end of that activity, I'll ask you to enter some information. So this is where we have that writing instrument and that piece of paper as you're going to be writing down your thoughts during this 1-minute activity. Do I have my timer ready? Let's see. Yes, I do. All right. So we mentioned how we need to know the vocabulary of emotions, be able to identify them. If we're going to deal with them productively, be able to communicate how we're feeling to others. So, in a 1-minute time span, I'm going to ask you to list as many emotions or feelings as you can. Think of all the feelings you know, write them down, and at the end of 1 minute, just enter in the number. I had 2, I had 18, okay, just the number. But for 1 minute, write down all the emotions that you can think of. 30 seconds has elapsed. We have another 30 seconds. How many emotions, feelings can you list? The 10-second countdown. And 5, 4, 3, ding, 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 ding. All right, if you would enter into the chat box the number of emotions or feelings that you were able to list in that 1-minute period. That 1-minute period for many people must have been very, very long as they listed a few and couldn't think of any more. And there's some research out there that in a 1-minute period, the average woman can list 18 different feelings or emotions. Men, the average guy, 3. It's the rhyming trio: mad, sad, and glad. And after that, it's like, perplexed is an emotion? Inquisitive? Oh, that's an emotion? Feeling that way? Oh, I didn't know those were emotions. And checking it out here. All right, we're seeing actually, everybody in the ballpark. You seem to be very sensitive, inwardly perceptive folks as we're getting the 11 to 18 range, which is, at the middle to top of the expectations. So thank you so much. And we're going to admit one more of our classrooms. Welcome. For those of you who have just joined us, where our topic tonight is social emotional learning. And we're covering the basics of the SEL movement. So welcome, we're glad you could join us. Now let's see, by a show of hands, we're actually won't be engaging in this particular one, but look, the person in the upper right-hand corner has their palm turned backwards, like the activity that we would be doing in the class if we were together. Somebody's picked it up pretty quick. But you'll have an opportunity to tell us about your experience with social emotional learning, teaching it to kids, whether it's informally as a parent, as a big sister, as a babysitter, a child care person. And some of you have already posted on our SEL Blackboard discussion board. I am looking forward to digging into that and getting involved now that our course is in pretty good shape. Just got to get that paraprofessional site up and moving. Oh my. Yeah, I've heard it from colleagues. It's like, oh no. As of June 2018, the New York State Department of Education has set out a requirement. All school districts must now teach social emotional learning. No more guidelines to that, just they're supposed to. And I'm involved as just a community volunteer on our local school systems SEL committee and the Tier 3 committee. But we hear teachers saying, oh man, this is just one more thing we have to do. When you think of all the duties that teachers have, I mean, nurse and counselor and instructor, mentor, supporter, you name it, and now you want this too? And so our district is trying to figure out, well, how do we make this achievable? How can we get this done without overburdening our teaching, our faculty? And one way that our Tier 1 committee is working on is how we infuse SEL into the lesson in the standard classroom behavior management. So it might be that we're reading a book together and we ask, gee, how else could this character have handled that situation? What do you think that character was feeling at the moment? What would be the outcome if the character made this decision? And wow, we're getting the kids to think about emotions and behavior and consequences and outcomes so we can infuse it into the curriculum. And then our colleagues, the school psychs, the special ed teachers, oh yeah, that's us, social workers, counselors, they get involved on the Tier 2 level, working with groups of kids, or the Tier 3 level, working with individuals in very small groups and teaching them values and appropriate behavior. As teachers, at least in our district, we are asking that if teachers make a referral about a youngster's behavior, that they try to put it into one of three categories. Does it have to do with social connectiveness, getting along with others? Or does it have to do with motivation? The kid just doesn't care one way or another what's appropriate and when it should be shown. We're going to focus a lot on motivation in our course. The reason being is that if we haven't got a kid buying into our interventions, pretty much even our most powerful interventions, differential reinforcement and self-recording, fall apart. We're going to be looking at a model that's well known in the field of social work and medicine called the trans-theoretical model. The trans-theoretical model says we go across theories. Doesn't matter whether you're an ABA person, a psychoed person, a socio-cognitive person, motivation goes across all of that. And we will be talking about, well, how do you assess a youngster's motivation? What stage of readiness they are at for engaging in and undertaking a new behavioral challenge? How do we assess the level? And then what interventions do we use to move them to a more and more motivated level? Yes, I see here in our chat room, someone is saying, yeah, we can share stories, study literature to build empathy, create a collaborative, or create collaborate boards, and other opportunities for interacting with others that we can't just talk about it. We got to actually teach these youngsters. Think of the teachers that a lot of our kids have experienced who say, why do you keep doing this? Change, show this behavior. But the youngsters have never had any practice in ever showing that behavior in their lives. So they run across these situations and they go with their default response, the one they've always used, which may be appropriate in other life situations, but not in the school. And so, yes, as a special educator, if you get queried by one of your gen ed colleagues, you might say, well, in which of the three realms does this youngster's behavior fall? Or that may be more than one, of course. So, okay. Yeah, we're getting a lot of good input here coming in. Thank you much. Yes, as we look at those three areas, we've got them numbered down below. Some of the questions we'll look at, some of the things that we'll try to determine. How healthy are these kids' social relationships? How secure are they? Gosh, we know that our kids with behavior disorders, labeled with the federal term emotional disturbance, are 3 times more likely than a kid who's non-labeled, not labeled, 3 times more likely to be socially rejected. Our kids with the label BD are twice as likely to be rejected by peers as youngsters with the labels learning disability or intellectual disability. That our kids, because of their behavioral patterns, which stand out so much and are socially odious to peers and to adults, that people say, I'm sorry, I don't want to associate with you. Unfortunately, they oftentimes find other folks who have been rejected, and they support these inappropriate behavioral issues, challenges. All right, what goals is this youngster pursuing? Is it attention? Is it power? Is it connection? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of these youngsters? Because if we can use strength-based learning, use what they know, use what they can do, and then try to build upon that. That's better than just starting from scratch. Appreciating what it is that they can do. Gosh, look at all the downfalls that can happen if one is not socially skilled. We know that our kids who have deficits in this area tend to have difficulty with achievement, whether it's paying attention, whether it's being organized, whether it's following directions within a 10-second time span, a latency period. Youngsters are more likely to drop out, probably because school is not a rewarding place. Think how brave our kids with behavioral issues and mental issues are, mental health issues, when they every day they get up and they come to a place where they don't feel welcome, they don't feel valued. It is a brave act on their part, and they are deserving of recognition. But I think we can understand why there's a greater dropout rate if they don't get that positive support that we can offer. Some of the other ones there that we've talked about. And that's during the school years. After the school years, those who don't have social skills can end up with all sorts of life issues. Some good points here coming across the chat room, that how we approach youngsters whose behavior is anywhere from pesky to aggressive, how we approach them sets the tone for how their peers will respond to them. And so, yes, whether we like it or not, We are role models, and we need to take that seriously. Um, yeah, there's a discussion going on regarding the younger years, and indeed, we'll have a session one evening on adverse childhood experiences or child trauma and the effect on the neurology, interaction with others, the limbic system, our alarm system, and why it is that some kids react so dramatically in circumstances that we say are rather benign. Ah, we'll get into adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma in a future class. All right, here's a chance to enter your thoughts into the chat room again. Which kids, and we're talking now with specific disability labels, not just the 13 that the Baker's dozen that we find for our IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. But let's think about the psychiatric labels, the DSM-5 labels, and which kids struggle the most with showing what are considered acceptable in mainstream society. Yes, a couple of folks are mentioning the ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, and again, a spectrum. It involves a number of different conditions that have been combined. For example, Asperger's syndrome used to be considered its own uh, disability area, but now it is considered one form, one demonstration of autism. I see ODD, yes, indeed, our oppositional defiant kids, the ones who seem to have a mission in life to defy any direction that is given to them. Certainly, they're going to struggle with being seen as having socially acceptable disorder. And many of our ODD kids are going to, a large number of them are unfortunately going to worsen if they don't get the supports and will become, enter into a new label of conduct disorder, not just disobedient and defiant, but aggressive, manipulative, breaking youth criminal uh, rules and regulations. Oh, and language processing issues, just difficulty understanding what has been said, and could also be on the nonverbal level of understanding social cues. I want to welcome the person who just joined us. We are deep into our topic for the evening, social emotional learning, and we'll get specific into social skills in just a bit. But yes, indeed, you folks nailed some of the more prominent ones, the kids on the spectrum. And gosh, our kids with intellectual disability, formerly known as mental retardation, of course, they don't pick up on things quite as quickly and in the same way. FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, um, oftentimes identified by the distinct facial features, but also the highly intervention resistant behavior patterns that emanate from mothers having consumed alcohol, too much alcohol, or I'm not going to get into levels, but due to alcohol consumption during pregnancy. Oh, yes, various labels, whether they're DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, or some countries use the ICD, International Classification of Disorders. and it gets into medical and psychiatric, but section 10 of that manual deals with psychiatric disorders, very similar to the DSM-5 manual. And kids from areas of long-term poverty. You'll say, wait a minute, a lot of us came from areas of long-term poverty and we turned out pretty darn good. Yes, Jawanza Kunjufu has an explanation for this in his writings, where he says you've got to consider that there are a lot of social ills, more so than in other communities in areas of long-term poverty. And some kids get the guidance in the home. They find the mentor, they find the civic organizations that serve kids in positive ways, Boys and Girls Clubs and Boys and Girls Scouts and all of those. But other kids don't get that, and they're exposed to the social ills in the home and in their immediate neighborhood, and they are at greater risk for developing behaviors that are seen as being antisocial. Oops. So in the chat box, what do you attribute your present condition to? I mean, those of you I've met and spent some time with, I know you as socially skilled individuals. Now, while you certainly should be patting yourself on the back, also think fond thoughts of the others who have helped you get here. But what do you attribute to your what are considered socially appropriate social skills? And others of you can pat yourself on the back with both hands because you shift gears during the day. You go back to a home, perhaps a different culture that has different right ways of doing things. And then you come out into the mainstream society and you're able to show the behaviors that are considered appropriate by the dominant culture. It's very draining from what I understand, myself being from that dominant culture. And I appreciate from my friends who are saying it ain't easy going back and forth. All right, so what do we attribute it to? Parents who were educated, and perhaps not so much educated in the college realm, but knowing about child rearing skills and supporting their youngsters. Yeah, I'm seeing family, teachers, friends, community interactions, strong family bonds, sports and clubs and community, and getting in trouble and just being tired of being punished all the time. Now that sounds like negative reinforcement. I do the right thing to avoid the negative thing, the punishment. It feels good not to be punished. But hopefully we also incorporate, that I'm doing it for the right reasons, not just to avoid punishment. Boy, teachers are coming up a lot. And think about it. We're with those kids 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And, we have a major influence in their lives. Yeah, there's probably some genetics in there too. Romantic and social relationships, some better than others, of course. Hobbies, family, friends, peers. All right. Thank you, gang. I can't wait to be looking through this when we have a little bit more time on our hands. And yeah, activities outside of schoolwork. And again, pointing into a home that was able to provide us with guidance. Yeah, and just in general, feeling connected to socially appropriate adults and getting recognition from them. Guidance. When we mess up, they pick us up, they dust us off, and they say, come on, you can do better. So that belief in us, that encouragement, providing us corrective guidance. And yeah, but now you're socially savvy, you're able to do all of these things. Congratulations, but yes, do remember those important people. If you're still able to do so, give them a call. If they're now somewhere in a they've passed from our life, say hello in whatever way you're able to communicate with them. So think about these situations, and there's no need to enter it into the chat room at the moment. This is just, thinking to yourself, how comfortable would you feel in these different situations? And I put some in here, of course, that are pertinent to me, but think about some of the ones that you've experienced. For example, I spend Lunar New Year with my wife's family. And there are certain things that I have learned I must do to fit in better. While I'll never be able to learn the language, there's the nonverbal things that I do. Keep the elder's teacup full. Use an Eastern grip on the chopsticks, not my easier Western grip. We all eat from a big plate. I've always had issues with that, reaching into a plate where other people are reaching in, but on Lunar New Year's, it gets done. I was invited by my students on Saturday and Sunday to join them in neighborhoods that I would typically not have the opportunity to travel through. And they would show me their neighborhood and introduce me to people and say things like, McIntyre, you walk like you got a stick up your butt. Put some verve into that. Come on, get a move. That fit in, look like you might belong here. Gosh, some of you are highly familiar with your traditions and the expected behaviors in a Jewish Passover gathering, and others would have to be instructed to dip the leaf into the salty brine and to say certain things and acknowledge certain things. So think of the ones where you felt uncomfortable and comfortable, and would you be able to adapt quickly? Thank you. I was just checking the chat room, and folks are continuing to contribute, and I thank you for that. Or how comfortable would you feel at a knighting ceremony? The fellow in the who's holding the sword and the document, that is Steve Forness. He has been a major figure in the education of kids with emotional and behavioral disorders. The former director of the Neuropsychiatric Institute that serves kids with mental health issues at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And this knight group called the Knights of Malta, they were respected by both sides during the time of the Crusades, because after the battles, they were the medics, and they would go out into the fields and medically treat both sides. And so they had the respect of both sides during the Crusades. But Mother Teresa was inducted into this, and Steve has done such good work. They asked him to become a knight. And he said, Tom, would you come along with me to this place down in the 40s, this restaurant down in the 40s in Manhattan, and just sort of be with me? I can invite someone. I said, oh man, I wouldn't miss this for the world. And went there, and we were escorted upstairs by a junior knight, and they had junior knights standing at the doors. And we were introduced to Sir Reginald. And Sir Reginald spoke with a very proper tone and carried himself very majestically. And we were carrying on a conversation, and periodically he would pull out this silver case with his cigarettes, open it up, grab a cigarette, and the junior knights would come from the doors with their lighters at the ready, and then he would put the cigarette back in his case, fold it up, and put it back in his jacket, and the junior knights would leave. And I recognized that he was showing his authority, his status within the group, as the others were showing theirs. But at one point he says, So Tom, tell me, what good work do you do? And I said, no, down the street, Hunter College, training in special ed. And he goes, oh, jolly good, noble work, young man. And I said, and sir, what do you do, Sir Reginald? And he goes, he looked uh, disjumbled, upset, and he says, no one in my family has worked in 400 years. I guess he just manages the money. Well, the blue collar kid came out. This is an opportunity to put a good jocularity nudge into someone. No one in my family has worked for 400 years. I said, wow, that's 20 generations of welfare. I'm expecting a laugh, and there's a shocked look on his face. He quickly recovers and says, please make yourself welcome at the buffet. We have some very tasty tidbits there. Excuse me while I excuse myself. Very distinguished way of handling it. But my right way of doing things, somebody presents themselves as uppity and you kind of bring them down a notch with a little dig. It was automatic and it was wrong. Am I motivated now to learn a new behavior? Uh-huh. From embarrassment, from having insulted someone? Yes, I have new motivation that unless I know somebody well, respect, respect, respect. One of those situations, if you could only go back and turn back time. All right. So we've cultural informants. If we were meeting for that full 2.5 hours, we'd ask you to share some of those important ceremonial happenings with us. But do these slides give us any clue as to why some of our kids display behaviors that just don't fit well in the school setting? Do we gain some insight? Because we've got certain groups that are overrepresented in the category of emotional disturbance. Why is it that there are 5 boys to every girl? Some writers have said, well, the schools demand behaviors that girls are more uh, proficient, can more easily display. It doesn't match well with boyhood. Why is it that kids of African American ancestry, kids who are Black, are overrepresented? We have a greater number, a greater percentage of Black kids in the category of emotional disturbance than we would expect. Well, certainly there's a lot of writing now, a lot of videos, a lot of talk, especially at Hunter College. The training we receive in implicit bias, institutional racism, and that, these kids are doing, most of them are doing the right thing in their household, in their neighborhood, in their community, in their culture, but it's not matching with the dominant culture's expectations. And we'll have a whole module on 2 modules on kids who are overrepresented. African American, kids of African American ancestry, or excuse me, of sub-Saharan African ancestry, are Black kids, and kids from areas of long-term poverty. We see more of them than we would expect given their percentage in the school system. I'm going to move us through rather quickly here because we had said that we wanted a shorter time period tonight. But yeah, why don't some of our kids show the social behavior that's expected? And do remember, this PowerPoint presentation will be developing on our Blackboard site within the next half hour. Well, they never learned the expected behaviors for a certain situation. They can't show it if they don't know it. Are kids on the spectrum? Well, gosh, there's some neurological issues involved here, where for kids from those disorganized sections of the low socioeconomic status areas have been exposed to a different right way of doing things for the people they're interacting with. But gee, some of our kids aren't going to notice that people are bored with them right now. I'm afraid to turn on the images here, but we will be done fairly soon. Um, Gosh, some of our kids who've experienced trauma during their childhood years view an approach of somebody as a threat. Gosh, really? Yeah, given their experiences, the quick approach of someone has been traumatizing, and our quick approach may be associated with that. And they misperceive the intent of our actions. They weren't supervised well and trained well by the others in just what is socially acceptable in that community and that culture. Or a lot of our kids, like we said before, they have a different right way of doing things, what is right in their home or culture. And yeah, they ain't going to grow out of it. Most of our kids learn by exposure, by people teaching them. But a lot of our kids didn't get that. A lot of our kids with the label emotional disturbance. And so we need to intervene. We need to teach it later than they would have picked it up. So we view behavior problems like academic problems. They're learning errors. The youngster just hasn't learned it well yet. And we are teachers. We are the important component in education, the you in education. We want to move from the traditional curriculum of control. Obey me because you fear me. This punitive approach, penalty-based approach. We want to move from that just creates, if it does create obedience, it's not from the heart. It's not because the kid believes there's a better way to do it. And for a lot of our kids, they are just going to say, you are not allowed to control me. And we get the defiance, the rebellion, the disruption. We want to move it to the curriculum of self-control, inner management of behavior. You'll be doing that in your social skills training and showing it in the unit that you'll be developing for our course. Gosh, all the things that happen on the good side when we talk about giving our kids social skills training. They achieve higher, they become more motivated to engage in schooling. They have a commitment, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection to the school, initially to the teachers. You gotta like the messenger if you're going to listen to the message. It's just human nature to cooperate more with people we like and respect and admire. Fewer negative behaviors, improved behavior, and less of the emotional overtones as the youngsters, again, feel more connected and more capable. As we move toward the tail end of our time together, at least our instructional time together, if you would imbibe me for just a second and cross your arms. And then if you'd uncross your arms and cross them again. Chances are both times you did it the same way. One hand's on the top both times, one hand's on the bottom both times. So what we want you to do is unfold your arms and put them together the different way before going back to your usual way and then going with this new way. Some of you were quick in picking up on that. Others of you, it's taking a while. It took me a while, but with practice, now I can do it either way. And when a situation presents itself, if I ever get invited to another knighting ceremony, I'll know to do it this way. It's not my usual way. It's not my automatic way. But being able to switch gears, as many of my kids became cultural chameleons, They were able to show a certain behavior pattern on the street corner and be able to show a, a progressively improving way of meeting expectations in the school. So they could go back and forth depending on the circumstances. Well, gosh, as you leave us here tonight, I would ask that in the chat room, you enter 2 takeaways from today's session. Now, it can be something you learned that you didn't know before. Maybe you want to expand on something, like, well, I see the point, but you haven't considered that something about the kids you're working with or the situation you're in, or the recommendation doesn't seem to apply as well to the online situation. Or do you have a question about the course, about social emotional learning? Do you have some concerns that you would like me to address in an email blast the next time I send out a notice? So at this point, I will wish many of you adieu, that you'll be clicking on the leave the session after you've entered your comments. Others of you will decide to stay and we'll talk about things that are on your mind related to this course. So until next time, again, I bid you adieu. I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint session. I'm going to go to video. And if anybody has